Record. Hello, my name is Nicholas Hobble, and today I will be presenting relationships between intergroup contact and prejudice among minority and majority status groups. The study was conducted by Linda Tropp and Thomas Pettigrew in 2005. So, a brief introduction to this topic is best done through a review of the previous literature. So, Allport in 1954 and Pettigrew in 1998 found that when properly structured to maximize positive group outcomes, intergroup contact can reduce prejudice. Longitudinal and experimental studies have shown supporting evidence for this relationship as well. Studies focusing on the different concerns of majority and minority status group members have found that those of the minority... What? Because it doesn't say it. Hello, my name is Nicholas Hobble, and today I will be presenting relationships between intergroup contact and prejudice among minority and majority status groups. The study was conducted by Linda Tropp and Thomas Pettigrew in 2005. So, a brief introduction to this topic is best done through a review of the previous literature. Allport in 1954 and Pettigrew in 1998 found that when properly structured to maximize positive group outcomes, intergroup contact can reduce prejudice. Longitudinal and experimental studies have shown supporting evidence for this relationship as well. Studies focusing on the different concerns of majority and minority status group members have found that those of the majority status group members are typically more centered around being perceived as prejudiced by the lower status group members. Studies focusing on the different concerns of majority and minority status group members have found that those of the majority status group are typically more centered around being perceived as prejudiced by the lower status individuals. Minority status group members, on the other hand, are more concerned with being the victim of prejudice from the high status individuals. Lastly, the authors cite research showing that higher status individuals think less about their group's privilege status and less of themselves in terms of that group membership. Minority status group members, however, know that their group is of lower status and that they are likely to be seen and evaluated as members of a low status group. So this leads us to the present study. So given all of this previous research, especially that last part about the apparent differences in awareness of status, the present study looks to determine the strength of the relationship between intergroup contact and intergroup prejudice as it relates to majority-minority status. So they asked, how do the relationships between intergroup contact and intergroup prejudice differ by majority and minority status groups in the previous research. In other words, do the positive effects of intergroup contact differ by the member's status? And they hypothesized that it would. Specifically, first, that the relationship between contact and prejudice should be weaker for minority status groups than majority status groups. And second, that the relationship should be stronger in contact scenarios with optimal conditions than in other conditions. So, how did they go about testing this? Well, this was a meta-analysis that looked at over 250,000 participants from 515 studies that took place over the span of the 1940s to December of 2000, and studies that took place in 38 different countries. And also these studies looked at different minority groups. It was primarily racial and ethnic groups, but some also looked at age, sexual orientation, disabled status, and mental illness. So the first thing they had to do was find relevant studies. And they did this by using 54 different search terms across a variety of databases, across a variety of fields. So they took studies from psychology, sociology, political science, and education. And then 2 independent raters coded the samples as minority status, majority status, or mixed status samples. And they achieved an inter-rater reliability of 0.94. And then the relationships in the previous literature were analyzed as a function of this sample coding. And here are the results. So in this table, we see that the effect of contact on prejudice, that is, that contact decreases prejudice, was weaker for minority status groups than in majority status groups. So in minority status groups, the mean R value was minus 0.18, and for majority, it was minus 0.23. So that indicates that it was stronger in the majority group, majority-only groups. Further, the strength of this effect appeared to be predicted by 2 variables: majority-minority status and optimal conditions, such that the relationship was stronger for majority status individuals and in contact scenarios with optimal conditions. So this is the table for minority-majority status, and at the bottom you can see that minority-majority status is a significant predictor of the effect of contact on prejudice. And that's above things like the type of study, the sample size, and the quality of the measures. And here in this table, we have contact conditions at the bottom showing stronger predictive power in majority groups than in minority groups. So, I mean, the star says it all. No, but you can see that this value in the majority status group for the effect of contact conditions is higher and is significant, versus the one in minority status groups was actually not significant, and it was lower. So, what are the implications of this? Well, the relationship between intergroup contact and prejudice seems to vary by the group member's majority-minority status. And specifically, the relationship seems to be stronger for the majority status group than for the minority status group. And as far as practical implications, we need to rethink how we attempt to decrease intergroup prejudice. contact alone is clearly not enough. And even the optimal conditions, optimal contact scenarios, are less effective and thus arguably less optimal for minority status group members. So some of the possible limitations of this study were the meta-analytic nature of the study, that it doesn't test prejudicial behavior directly. It didn't ask or test if people would act prejudicially. And also that it spans quite a bit of time, spans quite a bit of time before the 2000s. More on that in a second. The authors also mention that directly testing the effects of perceived discrimination or perceived differences in group status on the effects of contact on prejudice and directing the focus away from the traditional optimal conditions and towards the perspective of minority status group members would be some possible future directions for this area of research. I wonder what a more causal study would find today, or even a more up-to-date meta-analysis of studies on this topic from the years following 9/11, Obama's presidency, Trump's election, and the several social movements that have highlighted the differences between majority and minority status groups around the world. So with that, I'll hand it over to the discussion boards to take your questions and comments. Thanks for watching. Bye.